I didn't realize the moment my mind changed. It wasn't dramatic. No sudden breakthrough, no life-altering event. It started with something so small. I almost ignored it. I remember sitting in my car outside the office, engine off, staring at the same building I had walked into for years. Nothing about it looked different. Same glass doors, same parking lot, same people walking in with coffee cups and tired faces. But something felt off. Not in the world around me. In the way I was seeing it. At the time, I didn't have a name for it. I just knew I didn't want to go inside. It wasn't that I hated my job. I had convinced myself it was stable, predictable, good enough. I had a routine: wake up, commute, work, scroll, sleep, repeat. I used to think that was normal. Maybe even responsible. But that morning, sitting there, I caught myself thinking something unusual. What if it's not the job? What if it's the way I'm thinking about everything? The thought didn't feel inspiring. It felt uncomfortable. Because if that was true, then I couldn't blame anything else anymore. I went inside anyway. The day unfolded like every other. Emails, meetings, polite conversations that didn't mean much. I nodded at the right times, said what I was expected to say, laughed when others laughed. But there was a strange distance between me and everything happening. Like I was watching myself perform a role I had memorized years ago. At one point, my coworker Jake stopped by my desk. He was always the upbeat type. The kind of person who seemed naturally satisfied with life. "Man, Mondays, right?" he said with a grin. I nodded. Yeah. But then he added something that stuck with me. Still, could be worse. It was such a simple sentence. I had heard it 100 times before. But that day, it landed differently. Could be worse. I remember thinking, why do we always measure life that way? Why is "not terrible" the standard we accept? The thought stayed with me longer than it should have. That night, I couldn't shake it. I kept replaying small moments from the day, things I normally wouldn't notice. The way I assumed my boss was disappointed in me, even though he never said anything. The way I avoided speaking up in meetings, because I assumed my ideas weren't good enough. The way I interpreted neutral situations as negative ones, without questioning them. It was like I had been running a quiet script in my head my entire life. And I had never stopped to read it. The next morning, I did something different. Nothing big. Nothing noticeable to anyone else. I just started paying attention. Not to the world, but to my thoughts about the world. At first, it felt awkward. Almost artificial. I'd catch myself thinking, this meeting is going to be a waste of time. And instead of accepting it, I paused. How do I know that? Most of the time. I didn't. It was just an assumption. Then I'd think, my boss probably thinks I'm not doing enough. Again, no evidence. Just a pattern I had repeated so often, it felt like truth. That's when it started to get uncomfortable. Because I realized something I hadn't expected. My experience of life wasn't shaped by what was happening. It was shaped by the meaning I was assigning to it. And that meaning wasn't always accurate. For days, I kept observing. Quietly, privately. I didn't tell anyone. It felt too personal. Too strange to explain. But I started noticing patterns everywhere. A delayed reply to a message. I assumed someone was upset. A short response in a meeting. I assumed I had said something wrong. A quiet room. I assumed tension. It was like my mind was constantly filling in blanks, with the worst possible interpretations. And I had been trusting it. That realization hit harder than I expected. Because it meant one thing. If my interpretations were off, then so were my reactions. And if my reactions were off, then maybe the life I thought I was living wasn't entirely real. That's when I made a decision. Again, not dramatic. No big announcement. I just decided to test something. What if, instead of believing every thought, I questioned it? Not in an aggressive way. Just, gently. Like asking, is this the only way to see this? The first real test came a few days later. I sent an email to my boss with an idea I had been hesitant to share. Normally, I would overthink it for hours before sending. This time, I just sent it. A few hours passed. No response. Immediately, my mind started. He didn't like it. It was a bad idea. You shouldn't have sent that. I felt the familiar tension building. But then I caught it. Or, he's just busy. The thought felt almost too simple. But I stayed with it. I didn't check my email every 5 minutes. I didn't replay the message in my head. I just let it be. Later that afternoon, he replied. Good idea. Let's discuss tomorrow. That was it. No drama. No hidden meaning. Just a normal response. But it felt different. Because for once, I had experienced the situation without letting my assumptions distort it. And something shifted. Not overnight. Not completely. But enough for me to notice. Over the next few weeks, I kept practicing. Questioning thoughts. Observing reactions. Pausing before assuming. And slowly, things began to change. Not the world around me, but my experience of it. Conversations felt lighter. Decisions felt clearer. Even silence felt less threatening. I started speaking up more, not because I suddenly became confident, but because I realized my fear wasn't always based on reality. I remember one meeting in particular. Normally, I would sit quietly, waiting for it to end. But that day, I shared an idea. There was a brief pause. And in that pause, I felt the old pattern trying to return. They didn't like it. But then someone said, "That's actually a good point." The conversation shifted. And for a moment, I just sat there, processing it. Not the response, but the realization. How many times had I held back, because of a thought that wasn't even true? That question stayed with me. And it started to change the way I saw everything. I began to notice it in other people too. The way someone would apologize unnecessarily. The way someone would assume they were being judged. The way someone would hold back, just like I used to. It made me more patient. More understanding. Because I realized, most of us aren't reacting to reality. We're reacting to our interpretation of it. And those interpretations are often shaped by old experiences, fears, and patterns we never questioned. One evening, I ran into Jake again. Same guy. Same energy. Still surviving Mondays, he joked. I smiled. Yeah, but I think I've been making them harder than they needed to be. He laughed. Aren't we all? But I wasn't joking. Because something had become clear to me. The stress, the doubt, the constant tension I felt, it wasn't coming from my job, or my environment, or other people. It was coming from the way I was thinking. And once I started to see that, I couldn't unsee it. That didn't mean everything became perfect. I still had bad days. I still caught myself falling into old patterns. But now, there was a gap. A small space between the thought and my reaction. And in that space, I had a choice. That was the real shift. Not changing my life overnight. Not becoming a different person. Just realizing that my thoughts weren't always facts. And that simple awareness changed everything. Months later, I found myself sitting in my car again. Same parking lot. Same building. But it felt different. Not because anything outside had changed. But because I had. I wasn't dreading the day anymore. I wasn't assuming the worst before anything even happened. I was just present. And that felt unfamiliar in the best way. I sat there for a moment, thinking about how subtle it all was. No big moment. No dramatic turning point. Just a series of small decisions to question what I had always believed. And somehow, that had rewired everything. I got out of the car and walked toward the building. Same doors. Same routine. But this time, it didn't feel like I was walking into something I had to endure. It felt like I was walking into something I could experience, without distortion. And as simple as that sounds, it changed the way I lived. Because the biggest shift wasn't in my job, or my environment, or the people around me. It was in the quiet realization that had started it all. That maybe, just maybe, the way we experience life has less to do with what happens to us, and more to do with the meaning we choose to give it.